Everyone knew the Schecks were in love, and for Stacy, apparently in love with love itself. Richard was her 5th husband.
I don't know why she had so many husbands. When Stacy would get bored, it was on to the next.
5 times the charm, Stacy's cousin Connie recalls Richard was the best in her stable of husbands. In fact, he even adopted 2 of Stacy's 3 sons.
Richard was a great father to them. He brought a lot to the table when it came to the marriage.
The 46-year-old had a passion for hot air ballooning, but most of all, he loved scouting and was a den leader for his boys' Cub Scout troop.
Richard was this gregarious, just outgoing guy. He always looked to include everyone in the room into what we were doing.
Stacy, the breadwinner for the family, worked as a head administrator for a large medical and surgical practice in DeKalb County, Georgia.
She would work her butt off to make sure that her kids had everything that they wanted and needed.
But there was always time for love. On the last night of Richard's life, he was cooking Valentine's Day dinner for Stacy and her grandparents, an elderly couple who required round-the-clock medical attention.
At that point, Stacy and Richard had Valentine's to exchange for each other, gifts and cards. She made the decision that they would exchange them in the park. She told him to go ahead and meet her there because the nurse that was relieving her was late. And so she sent Richard ahead and told him to wait on her there.
They made their way in separate cars along the dark and winding road. Richard arrived first, but as it turns out, he was not alone. Someone else was there, lurking in the shadows.
It's a very secluded place. There was no pavement. There was no lights. And so it's a very eerie place, especially at night.
And eerie was about to turn deadly. 30 minutes later, Stacy pulls up and sees Richard's body punctured with bullets, lying in blood and dirt.
2 to the abdomen and 1 to the chest, and then 2 to the face, which is overkill.
When cops arrive on scene, they quickly rule out robbery as a motive.
When we searched his truck, we found there was $40 in the center console. His watch was on, his wedding ring was on, his wallet was on him. If it were a robbery, then there was about a $40,000 truck sitting there idling that they could have jumped in and taken.
One of the first to the scene, Lieutenant Dan Franklin, says from the get-go, something just didn't smell right.
Basically, red flags are the best way to put it.
The shooting appeared to be too over the top to be random.
Richard's just a regular guy who's unarmed, and he gets there and he's comfortable enough to get out of his truck and approach the person who ultimately shot him to death.
And in the darkened night, the mystery killer is already gone by the time Stacy says she arrived at the secluded spot. Detectives scour the crime scene for evidence, but there isn't much to go on. Suddenly, with police spotlights trained on the crime scene, soft dirt that absorbed Richard's blood seems to speak volumes to investigators, telling a chilling story.
The soil at the scene was soft, it was muddy, and it was very conducive to preserving tire impressions.
There, imprinted in the wet soil, were 3 sets of tire tracks.
We determined we saw Richard's impressions. We saw the impressions that Stacy's Ford Explorer made, but there was a 3rd set of impressions that came in from the park. You could follow them from the road. So that told us that the vehicle that left those impressions was there before Richard got there and then left, presumably after he was dead.
Cops believe the tire tracks had to be those of the killer, but matching them to a getaway car would be like finding a needle in a haystack. Or would it? Before cops can worry about how to make a match, a frantic Stacy makes a shocking admission.
Before we left the scene, she started telling us about an affair that she'd been having with a guy named Juan Reyes.
You heard right. Stacy was 2-timing Richard with her own Don Juan, which she tearfully brings up again during an interview with authorities.
I'm in deep with Juan.
In deep is an understatement. Investigators quickly learned Stacy had been carrying on an affair with her Latin lover for a long time.
And that affair had been going on for several years. Immediately that sparked our attention and got us looking at Juan as a prime suspect.
And And it turns out their suspect was close, working directly in Stacy's own office.
Despite the fact he had no medical experience, she hired Juan as a surgical assistant at the clinic she ran.
She tells cops Juan had previously worked as a security guard at a swanky hotel.
But please, I mean, I don't know anything about how this happened.
Okay, all right.
It all appears to be a classic crime of passion. A jealous boyfriend wants Stacy's husband out of the picture.
When we asked her if she thought Juan was responsible, she'd say she didn't want to think that he was responsible, but she didn't know.
Richard Scheck was excited about a Valentine's Day rendezvous with his wife Stacy. The meeting spot, a remote park in the Deep South. But on this night, love would turn tragic with a bullet to the heart.
He's been what? He's been shot! He is dead!
Cops are about to bring Stacy down to the station, hoping to learn more about who would want her husband dead, when she makes a shocking admission.
Before we left the scene, she started telling us about an affair that she'd been having with a guy named Juan Reyes.
In the interrogation room, Stacy comes clean about her Latin lover.
I am in, I'm in deep with Juan. I know that.
Stacy, who ran a large medical facility, openly admits she was not only Juan's boss, but also his lover.
Juan Reyes was hired as a surgeon's assistant, although he had no medical experience. Stacy had a lot of control over her life and people in her life.
And cops were about to discover she exercised that control with money. They soon learn Juan is a divorced father with a bunch of kids and hard up for cash.
I was very disgusted when I heard she was in a relationship with this guy, Juan.
Stacy's cousin Connie Hearn claims the family soon heard all the lurid details.
Stacy showering Juan with goodies, paying for his truck and cell phone, taking him on romantic getaways. Juan even lived in one of Stacy's homes, and then, of course, there was the secret love nest.
Stacy also had an apartment for her and Juan to go do their not so good deed.
Juan became suspect number 1 in Richard's murder. Cops nab him the next day at his office and notice there's a suspicious change in his appearance.
He had had a beard for like 2 weeks leading up to the murder. And then the morning after the murder, when we first made contact with him, he was clean shaven.
But the change doesn't seem to rattle Juan. At the sheriff's station, he even agrees to talk to detectives without a lawyer present.
Let me ask you this. Did you have anything to do with what's happened to Richard?
No.
Do you know?
No.
Who did?
Detectives hammer Juan with questions. He agrees to a polygraph. The results are inconclusive.
She's got you the job, she provides you money, the home that you live in, she and Richard own it, you're romantically involved with her. You can see this doesn't look good for you. I mean, I'm just being straight up with you, man.
And Juan seems straight up too, telling cops that despite his divorce, he was actually trying to reconcile with his unemployed ex-wife. He viewed Stacy as the means to an end.
Does she give you any other kind of money, or is there anything else that goes on?
If she knows I'm low on cash, she'll give me some money for cash for gas or whatever.
Did Richard know? Was he possibly trying to prevent this high-priced affair? Detectives keep digging deeper. And the hottest burning question remains, where was Juan the night of Valentine's Day?
Well, let's start inching towards the heart of the matter, and let's talk about where you've been yesterday and last night.
Sunday, me, the girlfriend, and my 7-year-old son, Anthony, we took him to the movies. About 5 o'clock, me and my son, Anthony, went up to Blockbuster.
What time did you guys eat dinner?
We ate dinner about, I want to say about 7:30. And by 10:30, I was in bed.
To check his alibi, detectives soon chat with Juan's ex-wife, who tells them his relationship with Stacy was close. Too close.
I didn't care for her much, but she was at my house for Thanksgivings, Christmases. She would take my daughter to get her hair done, her nails done. She bought Christmas presents for my kids.
But then Lieutenant Franklin reveals the devastating news that Juan's ex-wife only suspected.
I just confirmed her worst fears and told her that he'd been having an affair with Stacy for several years. She had had suspicions because, again, Stacy had a lot of control over them.
But even with that painful revelation, the woman scorned had the perfect opportunity to throw Juan under the bus. Instead, she confirmed his alibi.
He'd gone to Blockbuster while I was cooking, so between 6 and 7. And then he came home, he ate dinner in the room, and we went to bed.
A big part of his alibi hinged on a statement from his ex-wife. If she wanted an opportunity to tell me anything bad that he was doing, that was it. But she didn't do it. She said, no, he was home with me that night.
With his whereabouts confirmed, Juan was cleared. Now the question remains, if Juan is not the trigger man, who is?
So that's when our first break came, because we started looking at this as a murder for hire.
Richard Scheck's body was lying cold and riddled with bullets. At the very same moment, Georgia cops have Stacy Scheck in a quiet room with serious questions about her husband's murder.
In order to find out what happened out there, that's what we're...
But please, I mean, I don't know anything about how this happened.
Okay.
Stacy says she has no clue, but cops know there's at least one clue found at the bloody scene. A mystery set of tire tracks discovered in the wet soil.
The tire impressions didn't match her car or Richard's, so we knew there was a third person there.
Could that third person be the hitman? Detectives learned Stacy had been having an affair with a man named Juan.
Do you want to take a polygraph? Whatever you want me to do.
But her lover has a rock-solid alibi, and he's cleared, so cops are back to searching, obsessively trying to match the brand of tire to the tread marks and a killer.
We began to look on the internet. We went to tire shops. We went to the local Sam's, to Walmart, anywhere that sold tires.
Then a stroke of good luck as Lieutenant Franklin was checking out a local tire store.
My partner said, take a look at this one. And we determined that that was the brand tire that had left the impression. It was a Goodyear Integrity. And so at that point, everybody we talked to, their tires got looked at.
But with countless cars using Goodyear tires in the area, searching could be an overwhelming task. And just as cops were about to lose hope, an unexpected tip that quickly leads cops to wonder if Stacy wanted to rub out her fifth husband.
An IT technician at the spine clinic where Stacy worked called us.
His job to clear out junk email from employees' accounts.
And he said, when I went through Stacy's computer, I went to go ahead and empty her spam out of her inbox, but her inbox was completely empty for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, the day of the murder.
Another lucky break, an electronic trail with markings of a different kind.
And he said, that's very unusual. And he said, but I have backups of all of those if you guys would like to have them. And we said, absolutely.
Detectives immediately obtain a warrant for all of Stacy's emails after scouring 4,000 to raise eyebrows. One of them written a few weeks before the murder to a bank.
Request to transfer $8,902 from a real estate account that the doctor's office had into the personal account of a lady named Lenitra Ross.
Lenitra Ross, a medical assistant at the practice where Stacy worked, and then, curiously, another money transfer to Ross, just days before that bloody Valentine's Day.
The Friday before the murder, there's another request through SunTrust for another transfer for $1,100, and that went through also to Lenitra Ross's personal account.
Cops soon learn Lenitra was renting a home from Stacy. They immediately pay Lenitra a visit, recording the interview.
So how much money did you get overall?
It's been about, it was 89 at first, and then 8,900.
When you're looking at a murder for hire, you're looking for a transfer of money. And $10,000 is a nice even amount, but we needed to figure out who the other parties were.
But Lenitra seems to have a reasonable explanation. Stacy transferred money for repairs on the rental house.
Lenitra Ross said that she could provide receipts for the house repairs and for the water line repair.
And then we got another leak, a main water valve leak. So she paid for half of that. So it's been about $10,000.
Lieutenant Franklin was frustrated. At this point, the emails and the transfers lead nowhere.
But then another clue surfaces, this time from Stacy's own cousin, Connie Hearn.
That was my grandparents' car, the Impala.
Turns out the Impala was a car given to Stacy to sell, the money to be used for her grandparents' medical expenses. But strangely enough, the Impala would go missing for a few weeks out of Stacy's driveway, then suddenly pop back up. What didn't appear was the money.
Stacy had claimed that she'd gotten, I believe, $14,000 out of it, but my grandparents never saw the money. I thought that was weird.
And even more suspicious, investigators find the Impala parked at Lenitra Ross's house, stunningly with Goodyear Integrity tires on it.
I jumped up. I became extremely excited.
Now the only question, who was driving the Impala the night Richard was murdered?
There was evidence at the scene based on the layering tire impressions that the offender lay in wait for Richard.
On a hunch, Lieutenant Franklin turns his radar to cell phone records.
My thought process is he going to sit there and twiddle his thumbs, or what's he going to do, or is he going to make a phone call? A lot of people text constantly.
Franklin subpoenaed phone records made around the time of the murder from something called a tower dump.
When you make a phone call, your number, the number you dial, the date and the time, and the duration of the call are all captured at the tower, and that information is saved at the tower.
The tower serviced 4 major carriers, thousands of pages of records, but the dogged investigator had an idea. Compare the numbers from the tower dump to the numbers in Stacy's contact list and see if a match comes up.
I had to find a way to, I had to teach myself how to do this. About an hour into that search, I found a number that was in Stacy's phone that had made a call from Belton Bridge Park, or the tower that services Belton Bridge Park, on the night of the murder at about 8:40 p.m. So this phone call at 8:40 was very compelling.
The phone number attached to that call was listed in Stacy's contacts as a guy named Reggie, aka Mr. Results. Even more compelling was the number that Reggie called.
So I went back and looked, and I should have recognized the number because it was already in my notes, because it was Lenitra Ross. So at 8:40 p.m. on February 14th of 2010, whoever Reggie is, who is known to Stacy because he's in her cell phone contact list, called Lenitra Ross from the park.
But who is Mr. Results? Lieutenant Franklin Googled him the next day and found Reggie is a personal trainer and former semi-professional boxer who held boot camp sessions at Stacy's office.
At that point, things started coming together because we were already looking at a murder for hire, and this really kind of solidified that this was the third part of the triangle, because we had suspected Stacy was the linchpin. Lenitra Ross received money in the weeks leading up, and now this was our third person that we felt was involved.
An Impala with tires matching a bloody murder scene, money transfers, and a man named Mr. Results. By now, cops believe Stacy Scheck is in deep and possibly the mastermind orchestrating the murder for hire of her 5th husband, Richard. But do they have enough to make a charge? Remember those cell phone records? Turns out they are a honeypot of incriminating evidence.
Reggie makes a phone call from the park the night of the murder at 8:40 p.m., and we felt that call was to let Lenitra know that it was done.
And then Lieutenant Dan Franklin uncovers a series of bone-chilling texts.
3 minutes after that phone call, Lenitra texted Stacy and said, "I forgot to tell you I'm coming in late for work tomorrow. By the way, happy Valentine's Day." And it turns out that the Happy Valentine's Day was the signal from Lenitra to Stacy that Richard was dead and that she could go find him.
All that's needed now to make their case, proving the money trail. Lieutenant Franklin soon scoured the banking records of Stacy, Lenitra, and Reggie, revealing thousands of dollars intermingling among different accounts.
Reggie's payment for the murder was $10,000 in cash. Lenitra's payment for being the person that distributed money was that Stacy was going to deed a house to live in rent-free forever.
Finally, the last pieces of this sordid puzzle are coming together.
We're looking at a murder for hire. We had to bring in the money element, and so once we had that with the financial records, then we were ready to move forward with the arrests.
The day is long in coming, but cops can now make their move and capture the Black Widow.
The operation was called Operation Tangled Web, and so that was a huge coordinated effort, a huge team effort. Took a lot of planning. We served 7 search warrants in 4 different counties, 3 arrest warrants, all in one day in one operation.
Their biggest challenge, synchronizing the arrests so the murderous players don't tip each other off.
We realized that when we moved on these people, we needed to move on them all at once. If we didn't get what we needed from that one person, then they could communicate with the others and the whole thing would fall apart and we could lose evidence.
First to go down is Reggie. Then Lenitra is nabbed at a traffic stop. And police now confidently swoop in on Stacy at the location where so much of her planning took place, the office. But in a crazy turn of events, she gives cops the slip.
Somebody in that office told Stacy the police were there and to run. And so Stacy retreated into the hospital and basically got herself to a place where she was inside a room that only had card access, so we couldn't get to her.
It didn't take long for police to find her. Barricaded in that room, she eventually surrenders. Finally, 3 months after the bloody Valentine's Day murder of Richard Scheck, Lenitra, Reggie, and Stacy face some harsh questions.
You have the right to talk to a lawyer and have him present with you while you're being questioned. You understand, 3?
Yes.
In the interrogation room, Lenitra plays the innocent bystander card.
If you are ready to talk to me about why you're here, then I'm going to give you that opportunity.
I don't know why I'm here.
And Reggie has his own tactics. Denial.
Do you know who my murder victim is?
No.
Anybody tell you that?
Well, I heard about it.
Cops say Lenitra and Reggie fell for the murder plot, all for the money. But the burning question, why did Stacy want her husband dead? In a stunner, she tells cops that Richard was molesting her kids.
I was convinced that my kids were being harmed.
Stacy's claim is based on something she says one of the kids told her.
You don't know what he does to me when you're not here.
Stacy tells investigators she was molested as a kid, so to protect her boys, she wanted Richard killed. She confided in her work buddy, Lenitra Ross.
And I told her then that I didn't want police, I didn't want a divorce, I just wanted him dead if somebody was molesting my kids.
According to Stacy, Ross tells her she knows the guy for the job. Her sometime boyfriend and baby daddy, Reggie, AKA Mr. Results.
And I was like, Reggie, really? And she was like, yeah, that's what he did. That's what he does. That's how he supplements his income. You know, he does jobs.
Stacy tells cops Lenitra arranged a meeting where they cooked up a plan to murder Richard in cold blood.
And then he said, so I hear you need some help getting something done. And I was like, well, maybe. And I told him, I said, well, I have a strong suspicion and all it's come to me that I think that he's messing with my kids. And then I was like, well, how much cash? And he was like, well, you know, I was thinking around $10,000. I was like, okay.
To sweeten the deal, Stacy agreed to give Reggie her grandparents' Impala. Yes, that Impala. Lenitra's cut? She'd get the house she was renting from Stacy. A week later, all 3 went to scout out the crime scene, Belton Bridge Park.
He was like, yeah, this is the perfect place. And I even made a comment that, you know, I might have to use this place more often.
But the night of the murder, Reggie botched things up.
Stacy Scheck wanted to set it up to make it look like a robbery. In fact, she was very angry because the victim's watch wasn't taken, his money wasn't taken, the truck that Richard Scheck drove to the scene were not taken. To make it look like a robbery.
And that's not all Stacy says Reggie screwed up. Remember how over-the-top cops described the shooting? 3 to Richard's chest, 2 to his face?
It was supposed to be 1 shot to the head. I said, if you're gonna I don't want him to suffer, I don't want him to see anything, you know.
As for the molestation story, in the end, police discovered Stacy's son admitted Richard never laid a finger on him.
He said no. He said no. He said, I'm sorry I exaggerated. I'm sorry that I said those things. I blew things out of proportion, Mom.
Her son, she said, later told her that the comment that he had made didn't have anything to do with anything like that, but rather he was a little bit more restrictive than she was on what they could do as children.
Stacy later revealed a different and real reason she ordered the hit on her husband. Now, she claimed, she feared losing custody of the kids if she and Richard divorced.
Ultimately, I think her motive was to just live a life free of Richard, and that this was, in her eyes, the only way to make that happen. She knew that the life that she was living would not be good for her in a divorce case, and so divorce was not an option for her.
Stacy Scheck was controlling and conniving and manipulative. She used people to the extent that she needed them, and beyond that, it just didn't matter.
The district attorney says the trio thought they committed the perfect murder and that they could easily outsmart small-town cops, but they were wrong.
They just thought that this was not Metro Atlanta, and you know, they just a bunch of you know, rednecks who simply weren't going to be able to find out what happened, but they did.
With so much evidence against them, Stacy and Reggie pleaded guilty and were convicted of malice murder. Lenitra stood trial but was convicted of the same charge. All three will spend the rest of their lives behind bars. And as for Stacy Scheck, it's unlikely she will ever tie the knot with husband number 6.
Stacy Scheck received eventually a sentence of life without parole. She will never be released in prison except in a box.